Hey, thank you very much for watching. I need you to subscribe right there, right now, and enjoy the rest of this content. And please, if you have any comments or if you desire to share, please do so. Hey, enjoy.
Saw this picture that showed all these well-dressed black men downtown in Dallas.
Yeah.
And they got them together, and what got me was the whole title to that picture, which was called Change the Narrative.
Yeah.
And so this man decided, because of all the negative news you've seen, and in this case with R. Kelly, Michael Jackson, Jussie Smollett, you're seeing these kind of images of some black men who are really fallen down. And he felt the need to say, listen, let's change that narrative. Let's put some pictures out there of some educated black men who actually are doing well, so that this doesn't become the narrative that becomes a stereotype that we know becomes implicit at some point.
Yes, yes. And, you know, I recall when we were talking about that conversation earlier in the week, I then had an experience literally right after that where I was walking in a neighborhood.
What happened?
And it was at a car wash, decided to walk through the neighborhood. And at some point, my friend didn't pick up on this, but I was like, you know what? I really shouldn't be walking through this neighborhood. I wasn't wearing my suit. I'm not wearing a suit today right now, but I thought, wait a minute, how would others perceive me, black man, walking through their neighborhood? I don't live there. It was just so happened the car wash was right there. And I was like, you know what? We better cut this a little short. And when I posted about that, it caused a lot of people to have all kinds of feelings and thoughts about it.
Now, I didn't have a chance to take a look at it, but what were people saying?
Many people were like, you're a smart man to realize that you may not need to be walking through a random neighborhood that may not necessarily be welcoming or be looking at you as maybe some type of character, you know? Right. A super majority of the comments were just like that. They were like, why? And other men and black women, people of color were saying, totally understand how you need to be careful walking through a neighborhood. If you're black and maybe you don't necessarily live there, because what could happen? The police may be called. You could have an encounter with somebody, and those are real life. It's real.
Yeah, see, and this is really tough because isn't this covered in Green Book, where they talk about the sundown towns? And obviously we don't have that today, but we do have remnants of some of that stuff carrying over. But I imagine you probably got two responses. There was people who, like you, melanated like you, said, yeah, that's right, think like that. And then I imagine people not melanated said, come on, that's not a problem anymore. Why are you even worrying about that? Because there's some ownership here of some stuff that happened in the past. And it's like, can't we get past all this? Can't we get through that? And I'm thinking, you probably had a good discussion back and forth.
Oh, absolutely. and so what's interesting, you're right, there were lots of people who, black women, African-American men who agreed, even Latino women and men agreed. There white women and men who agreed as well. But then there were some people who did not necessarily agree. And what happened was immediately there was the talk of like victimhood.
Yeah,
and the talk of, well, this applies to everybody. And so can I just pause right there?
Go ahead.
Number one, absolutely, as far as this whole stereotyping and profiling and everything, everyone, it applies to everybody.
Right.
Every race, every creed, whatever it may be. And it's particularly important when you're in business as well and in negotiations as well, because how you're perceived is important when you are interacting with your counterpart or someone else, because they may have some preconceived notions, or you may say things or do things that may trigger things that may cause a less likelihood of you getting a deal done.
That's exactly right. And as sometimes what I do as a professional development coach is I do career coaching. And again, if you don't think people are making up an idea of who they think you are when you go on a job interview, if you come in there with broken English, or you can't make good eye contact, or you're talking negative about the last place you were at, they form an opinion of you right off the bat. So people are pervasively thinking things and looking for certain profiles of people so that they can discredit or push away or maybe not want them.
Well, and I think what we do is we try to put something into a box that's familiar with us. Yes. And we try to categorize things and process them so that, okay, now I know how to interact with someone. And so it's a natural reaction, a natural human reaction for us immediately when we see something. We have to try to process it and say, what is this? Is it safe? Is it dangerous? Is it all these variety of different things?
Oh, I love that you said that, Steve, because you're right down my wheelhouse. So when you're talking about implicit bias, for example, right? This is the stereotyping that we do that we're not aware of. That's based off of favoring or not favoring people based off of some stereotypes that you have built in your head. So when you see this, you see, say, maybe a black man walking down the street. You may think several things about this person depending on your background. So if you're a fellow black man, you just see another brother and you might give the sign or do something like that. Where somebody else thinks, oh, I better look down and just keep walking. I don't want him to come over here. He might try to sell me something, ask for money, or maybe rob me, right? And so there's these ideas that we already have and stereotypes, and what feeds those stereotypes is what we're talking about today. Because when you see a bunch of black men on TV, and it's the Jesse Smollett, the Bill Cosbys, and these folks, and it seems like there's always something nefarious attached to them, you might get the idea that, hey, where are the good black guys at? And they're not there? They're not in the news? Oh, this must be what black people are. And that's an association you make in your head without even really thinking about it because it's implicit.
Well, I love that. And so one of the interesting things that came up in the conversation was, okay, you're in a neighborhood and you don't feel comfortable. And then the question is, where do you live now? And why would you ever live in a neighborhood that you don't feel comfortable in? Right? And so, number one, I agree with that wholeheartedly. Yeah. I agree completely that why would I go live in a neighborhood where there be some place where I don't feel safe, or maybe I don't believe the people are, the same type of people or fluent or whatever, whatever that makes you feel comfortable, or you feel that it's going to benefit you and your family or whatever it may be. I understand all those kinds of things, and I personally agree that hey, I would not live in a neighborhood I don't feel comfortable with. But the question I believe is that in 2019, why would there be it okay for certain, especially like affluent neighborhoods where, you know what, it's okay, we understand that you can't live there, or you shouldn't feel comfortable living there, and why do we still have those types of things now? And I'm not in the mode of trying to trailblaze and go live, and not trying to do that type of trailblazing, but that's an issue. If someone's just thinking, hey, well, don't live there, well, fine, that's right, but still it's not right, because that then transcends to boardrooms, access to capital,
that's right.
All those kinds of things.
Yes.
And that's where we need to be trailblazing, for sure.
I agree. It becomes systematized and institutionalized, and then when that happens, if we're believing a concept of someone based off of some old stereotypes or something that keeps being shown on TV over and over and over again, then yeah, you're going to then at that moment start discriminating out certain people. And then if people then decide to fight against that, that does not mean they're fighting from a victim standpoint. They're fighting from a justice standpoint. And I think some people, because they're not the other side, they can't see the injustice that's going on. They just want to believe everything's fair 100% across the board, even though we all know it's not. And that college entrance thing, that whole admission scam,
right,
kind of shows you that, look, if I have power and money, look what I can do.
That's right.
And it was only because of why did that get exposed? Because somebody eventually said something, but otherwise, now, how long has it been going on?
Yeah.
It's been going on probably for decades.
Yeah, interesting enough, how it really got exposed because somebody was being criminally investigated up in New Jersey on an unrelated SEC investigation, said, hey, I have something else I can give that maybe I can get some leniency on my sentencing. And
kind of negotiating, huh?
Yeah. He negotiated a deal, and from there, a lot of people got exposed. And just recently, I just read this morning, USC is now investigating 60 different students who were enrolled and trying to figure out whether or not they benefited from this whole Operation Varsity Blues. And so. And that's a whole flip side of this whole talk about who we are and sort of perception and everything else. But the deal is, and you pointed out earlier, if we're talking about these things where it appears that it's like victimhood or whatever, people then sort of lose the ability to empathize, because people start saying, okay, wait a minute, here you go again talking about this issue associated with race or profiling or police brutality or whatever it may be.
Yeah, and that's the problem, because like what we're trying to do here is we're trying to say, okay, we've come a long way, right? Some things in this country were really bad. We've fixed some of these things, but then we still have some other things that we need to work on. And so that last little leg of the of the race is what we're saying. Okay, let's work on this last piece. And so to that point, what I find horrible is the fact that when people start talking past each other, because now everybody's playing the victim.
Right,
everybody's saying this, and I've heard white guys say the same thing because they're getting jumped on by LGBTQ, women, gender issues, the race issues. So now you have white guys even saying, "Well, dude, I can't go anywhere without somebody blaming me for something, and it wasn't me, right?" So now if everybody's playing the victim,
right,
and then saying they're not playing the victim because it's you that's playing the victim, just because you seem to be playing it harder for some reason, then what you have is no compassion. You have nobody who is willing to say, hey, let's stop and let me just try to understand life from your shoes for a minute before I try to assert all the problems that I have. And so if you got a community that won't come together because they can't empathize with each other, then how can you get this unity? And how can you say you're not going to be these ills that people point out? And there's nothing wrong with pointing out ills if we got a plan, right? Because if we're going to work on a plan together, then we need to talk to each other. But if you can't hear me because you've already got your implicit bias about what you think I'm going to come from and what I'm going to say, then it makes the conversation stall out and not be good. And then what you get is people yelling at each other online instead of actually really having a conversation. And that needs to be changed.
Yes, it needs to be changed. And the question is, how do you change it? So do you not talk about these issues of race and profiling or whatever it may be, so as to not get into this out-victiming one another, if there's such a term or whatever.
Right.
So if you don't talk about it, maybe it goes away that way. I think the answer to that is no.
Correct.
And so then of course screaming and yelling at each other is not the way to do it either. And so what is a positive way to do it? There's got to be a process or a way to go about doing this that will increase the likelihood of understanding and allowing people to be their better selves.
That's right. So I think what this starts with is, first of all, it starts with the ego itself, almost, with the person. Because if you elevate yourself in some kind of way, then what's going to happen is you're going to other people, right? You're going to other them because they're not you and they didn't fight hard and they didn't pull themselves up by their bootstraps like you did, even though we see you had help getting into college, right? But if the moment that it becomes this ego thing where I've got to survive in order for me to win, you've got to lose, that becomes a huge problem. So
that's right.
If that happens, you can't even do the unity thing. So I think everyone needs to check themselves, and everybody needs to look at themselves and realize that we're just an individual part of a bigger, broader whole.
That's right.
And so if that's the case, I need to try to understand, what good is it if my right hand wants to cut off my left hand? That's not good. But they need to understand that even though they're both hands, but they're just situated differently, but they're still both useful. So how is it that I need to look at people and say, hey, what's useful about this person? Rather than in my head thinking about, oh, well, I know about you already. You're probably one of these people who votes Democratic and you probably live on the south side of town. The only reason why you got to college is because of affirmative action and blah, blah, blah. And they load all that stuff up. And then the other person loads up, well, you got there because of college, and privilege and blah, 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 blah. So I think it really comes down to almost that question of, are you my brother's keeper? To which Cain said, no, I'm not. But really, if we're community focused, we kind of are. And so if we looked at each other like that, instead of as other, if we looked at each other as, no, you're actually a part of me. Then I need to get familiar or acquainted with that other part of me.
Yeah, and I think
and there's some people speaking in.
Yeah.
Look at this.
It's different from state to state. I'm from California, where I moved to Texas. I can see the segregation. Oh yeah, so this is a person I know. My finger is coming up there. I know when you see this in the thing. I apologize, folks. I can see the segregation differences more. Very good point. So regional kind of differences. So certain things resonate with people who are from the South because of their shared experiences, as opposed to people who are coming from California, or maybe from the Northeast, that come to Texas or the South and are like, whoa, this is crazy here. And having lived in different places and everything, I think it's just some things are more overt, but I think they're still underlying, they're still sort of the same issues in many ways. But I like to talk to people, especially in the negotiation context of understanding who you are.
Yes.
And what I mean by that is, what are your natural inclinations? Because if in fact you want to understand other people, I think the first thing you have to do is understand yourself. And by understanding yourself, I think it's very important to understand, are you predisposed, are you naturally in a competitive type of person, or are you cooperative? And so competitive people immediately, you know that you're going to immediately view it as a competition, a game where you're trying to win, and you're going to be viewing other people naturally with the lens of they're other, they're whatever they have going on, I can outdo them, or I can out-victim them, and all that kind of stuff. And so right. you have to be very careful about that and understand, okay, that is true about me. And so with that, knowing that, then I need to kind of watch it and maybe try to figure and work on that and try to develop more of a cooperative style as well. And then beyond that, there are several different personality types, and you know a lot about that as well, where you need to understand what type of personality type you have. And that's why it is so important to talk about these issues and to talk about, okay, if you are a person of color, you need to understand, number one, who you are, and maybe some psychological things that maybe that you may be holding on to or whatever it may be. But then at some point later, you need to understand how people may perceive you as well.
That's right.
And not for the point of, again, out-victiming someone or anything like that, but just understanding what is that might be out there to arm yourself to be able to work and negotiate and try to reach a goal, a collective goal, because at the end of the day, you can't do it by yourself.
That's exactly right. And I think that's, I love that you put it that way too, because one of the things that I face a lot, and being, for me, being biracial, right?
Yes.
Right? I got my African-American friends, my black friends, and pro-black and all that.
Yeah.
And then I've got the white side of my family, which is actually French. So, and then the French have a completely different perspective on African Americans, right? They don't have the same, right? So having that, I've had to sit in the middle and watch.
Yeah, I bet.
Both sides and how they fall in and how they fall out.
Yes.
And I would think if we're talking about specifically race, and I see David, and I'm going to mention your comments there too, David, and hey, Sean. The whole idea is that when you look at a problem, and you can't ignore history. Right, you can't. Like you said, like you can't ignore.
Yeah, you can't
ignore history. History is there, but history is also there for us to learn from it, right? And so you also can't have a history that was predominant of putting down and discrediting a group of people and expect that goes away in just 25, 30 years after the Civil Rights Act or something like that. So what you have is, for example, if we take the peculiar institution and then how that affected the laws in this country, right? You're not going to get over that by not talking about that, because you feel
what
like
institution you're talking about now? Say
that peculiar institution.
Oh,
known as slavery. That's what it was called. In
that's how we. That's how we. Is that we're gonna phrase it?
Yes. Well, that's what it's called in the Article of Confederation. Okay. We're talking about what the rules were. So here's the thing. Some people don't understand that when slavery happened, for example, it broke both people. Right, because it made one group feel like they were superior when really they weren't, and it made the other group feel like they were not superior at all.
That's right.
So it creates two different types of problems. So in this country, in the West, what we have to understand is what was the history, what was the legacy of where you come from and your people, and how your people instigated or collaborated or went along with it.
That's right.
And then benefit from it, and then say, okay, well, now that we know the history, we know what happened, that we don't have to play that game of, how I feel about it or not. How would you then approach the other person, knowing the context, knowing the history of what has happened, so that you can then show some sort of empathy, and it has to go both ways, but here's how it starts. When you're looking, because people always ask me, well, how would you solve that problem that we have with that gulf of racism and all that stuff?
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, it's pretty simple in concept, but it takes work, and that's the hard part. And that is, you got to be around people who are not like you. If you look at most people, they're hanging out with people who are just like them. So they have the same kinds of thoughts, and they believe the same kinds of things. And then when they run across people who are from the other, they seem far into them. And it really shouldn't be if we're living in a country that's supposed to be united. I know that's Sean. So here's the thing. I would like to see, and I would think would be helpful, in a conversation where people say, I agree to sit down, I'm not going to make it a debate, I would like to see that and this is, I'm standing out there on this, okay? For white people, instead of trying to skirt it, instead of trying to pretend like it isn't there, it doesn't happen, all that stuff, it's probably good to be empathetic and try to listen and hear something from a perspective that you wouldn't have because you didn't come from the family and the generations of people who had to tell you things about green books and things like that. Now, that's one thing. Now, it's because you go, what about the African Americans? What about them? Now, for us, we have to sit back and we have to say, listen, I'm not going to use anything as an excuse for me not being better.
Oh yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I'm not going to use the fact that that did happen in the past, and yet it may be harder to get an entrance in certain places. I'm not going to use that as an excuse. I'm actually going to use it as empowerment to get forward, because we've got heroes who did that. Rosa Parks, Harriet Tubman, Martin Luther King Jr., a whole bunch of people. So there's this understanding of, hey, I won't let it be an excuse, and hey, I won't, from the other side, hey, I won't use it as a lack of empathy looking at you. There's a meeting in the middle.
Okay, two things.
Go ahead. And then we got to get these folks here.
Well, it's along with what Sean is saying right there.
Yes.
When I heard you say peculiar institution, and it's a phrase that has been used before and everything, it is a way, for many that would think that it's whitewashing.
Yes.
And so, one of the key platforms that is right now among presidential candidates is the idea of reparations. Believe it or not,
oh boy.
Bernie Sanders has already had to address this. Several of the candidates have already addressed the whole idea of reparations. And the reason why I'm going to say it a couple more times is because when people hear the word reparations, they are like, they're like, whoa, that means it's huge. And for the,
that means we got to give up some stuff to give y'all some stuff we don't think you were.
And the deal is also it means, okay, we have to have a certain view of history.
Right.
It can't. We're not talking about peculiar institution.
Right.
What we're talking about is grabbing people, take them across the ocean, making them work for free, and then have generation after generation do the same thing and not pay them, and then have all these other dehumanizing things done. And so that is what happened, and and then you have to understand sort of the whole why we had the Civil War, all these different things, because the problem is sometimes we can't even agree on history.
That's true, right?
And that's a huge issue. It's a huge issue, and so there's got to be some kind of a framework where everybody can say, okay, this is where we can start, and we can agree on a few things. And if we can't agree on those, then we're gonna have to go back to the process, But like,
it's true.
It's a huge issue.
True. Yes. No, that's exactly true. And real quick, I'll read these comments and then I'm going to respond to you on that. See, how do I do this real quick? So, Sean Presley says, watering down history will disillusion future generations. I agree. It is important for people to understand the why and how we overcame the original problem. That's right. David said here, solutions start with actually the 6 C's. So he thinks like me in a lot of ways. He's got it down to a 4. But he says consciousness, coping skills, communication, conflict resolution, courage, and commitment. I love that. I gold star that all the way. Sean says, absolutely, PJ. Sean says he loves learning and viewing events from multiple points of view to understand the influence. And I think influence is important because how you've done things is going to influence how you do future things, right? You've heard companies say, well, that's the way we've always done it. Well, when my dad owned this company, that's the way he did it, and he was successful.
That's right.
So that's the way we're going to do it. But we're saying, no, we've actually got new data, new information that's actually pushing us to uncomfortableness, which will then lead to some sort of mastery.
That's right.
Right?
That's
because
right.
in order to master something, you got to be uncomfortable first.
That's right. That's
and
right.
Then you learn by looking back. Oh wow, I actually mastered it while I was going through the uncomfortableness.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And so I think part of the uncomfortableness is looking at yourself.
Yes.
And recognizing, okay, wait a minute, do I have some biases within me? And we all do.
Yep.
And we all do. And so once you look at your own biases and you're honest about yourself, or you may need some help to someone to point those out to you.
Right. Those blind spots.
That's right. Then then it's also understanding who you're dealing with.
That's right.
And understanding that. And so I agree that we absolutely have to have these conversations and be open and honest, but it's got to be in a safe place to do it as well.
Yeah, that's right, because nowadays what you see, the internet is not the safe place if you look at comment sections. There is so much cancer and vitriol in comment sections when you talk about any of these things, and you see people jumping in with a hardcore stance which is only going to continue to keep the divisiveness going. And it's like, no, you should be seeking to understand.
That's exactly right.
Not just to be understood, as I quote Covey there. So I'm totally with you. And I also believe here on this is that if every one of us can look at it from the perspective of, hey, listen, yeah, we got to have these conversations. The conversations may get heated at some point. But at the end of the day, what I'm betting on is that people need to look at the other person as this is yet another person. That's all.
That's right.
Just telling us an experience that they've had. That's all. So who am I to try to judge them and try to tell them that their experience isn't what their experience is? And that's what creates problems, right?
And that's exactly right. And that's what happened quite often. And good morning, Shirley. Thank you for joining.
Yes,
where when I was communicating about an experience,
right.
Basically the person was saying, that didn't really happen. Like, or like this doesn't exist. And I'm like, hey, wait a minute, racial profiling is well documented. And even beyond that, profiling is well documented. And somehow then they flip to their experience and, oh, of course that existed. And then it was also the triumph. And I pushed through it and I made it work and happen. And we absolutely want people to be victorious.
Absolutely.
Part of the thing is identifying what are some of the key processes that you could have in place that if we look back and you figured out what you did right and why it worked out, that it could be repeated over and over again and we could share it with others and help other people be successful.
That's right. People have to understand language is going to construct things. Just how we talk explains and says something to somebody without us even going into depth and explaining. When we hear an accent, we believe, oh, they're like me, they're from Philly, or they're like me, they're from whatever, right? And we start to give people credit for things just because it's something that's familiar, and we have to remember how that is. And so I think the really brilliant thing that we can do right now is if you're a person who really wants to push the needle forward in terms of relations with people, and this isn't just people of a different ethnicity, it's to say, okay, let me just start with the fact that, and this is spiritual for a second now, this is just another image of God I'm talking
about. And we're running a little bit of time here.
We're running out of time. So if that's the case, then how would I want to treat this person if I know that this person's also an image bearer? Right? We're all image bearers of the same thing. So now what we're talking about is just differences here and there. And differences aren't necessarily bad, and neither should they be told that this is more superior. If you have a certain kind of nose and a certain kind of skin tone. No, as soon as we start hearing superior talk, we should smell a rat in the room right then and there and be ready, I think, to just challenge it.
That's right.
Ask about
that's right.
Right?
And that's what we need to be doing. That's a good takeaway, is sort of challenging things when we understand and know at some point, okay, this may be wrong. You know, there's no such thing as a race being more superior than another or anything like that. Any talk of that is just complete nonsense. But hey, I want to thank every single one of you joining us today. We've had a great conversation. And PJ, where can they find you?
So you guys can find me, PJ Dunn, on PJ Dunn TV on YouTube, and then of course on Facebook, Dunn Coaching, Dunn Consulting. So I'm a professional development coach and behavioral scientist and speaker, keynote speaker as well. And then you can find me on Instagram and Twitter, also under that name, PJ Dunn CCP. And how can they find you?
On Facebook, E. Steve Bolden. Also on Instagram, E. Steve Bolden. Bold Creations Holding Company, that's on YouTube. And hey, again, thank you all for joining us today. And please comment, please share, please like. Hey, thank you very much for watching. I need you to subscribe right there, right now.